Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Revolutionary Health. I am not Charles Stevens. My name is Johnnie Kornegay, and I'm the Mobilization Director with the Counter Narrative Project. And I am joined with.
My name is David Malebranche. I'm an internal medicine physician, and happy that Johnny is co-hosting with me today. Hooray!
Yes. So normally I'm behind the scenes
Hmm.
on this show, and I'm happy to be able to join David tonight to talk about a topic that's like super dear to me. So the topic that we really want to jump into tonight is aging parents.
Right, right.
And I know that this just could mean a lot for folks. So I'm excited. I know that folks are already joining us. So thank you to folks online for joining us. Please, please, please remember to like us, to like this video and share this video so you can let folks know that we're on live right now by sharing this video on Facebook. And make sure that you like us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, like us on Instagram. And we're excited. So please, as we're having the conversation tonight, feel free to chime in and share your thoughts. I'm going to do my best to watch for questions. So, okay, bear with me here. We may not be able to get to all of the questions or all of the comments this evening, but we're going to try.
Yeah, I think if you guys have questions, and the topic again is aging parents, so we're gonna bring a perspective as Black gay men, like as we all age, and our parents, we watch our parents age as well. How are our relationships there? Is it different for us than it is for other gay men?
Mhm.
Is it different for us than it is for other races, other ethnicities, other sexual orientations? And I think we want to kind of unpack that, and we want to hear from you guys. So if you have stories about your parents, some of the things that's going on with your parents, possible resources, we may be able to help with that. And then also a reminder to go on YouTube. All the Revolutionary Health episodes are on YouTube. So subscribe to the channel, like it, share it, do all the things that Johnny said do on social media. Go ahead and repeat all that on YouTube.
Absolutely. Um, so David and I were chatting for a bit as we were getting ready for the show, and so I left home. I left the area that I grew up in.
Hmm.
Shoot, it's about 15 years now. So I left home when I was still in college,
Right.
and but I didn't move far. So I was always at my parents' house, right, and spending time with them. And so I left the area that I grew up in 15 years ago and moved to Michigan, really far away, right? And so just was like, I'm living my life, you know. I took a new job, it was amazing. And it's so interesting. So, like, for me, over the last like 3 years,
All right.
is when I have something has, I really began to notice that I was missing parts of my parents' lives as they age. And it really began to make me reflect. What has been your experience?
It's interesting. I think it's come in stages. And
Mhm.
so, I left home for college when I was younger. I left home for good. I stayed in New York City, and I'm originally from upstate New York, so my parents were living up there. And so when I lived in New York City, I was able to go back and forth.
Mm.
But I think, what happens a lot of times is that you kind of blink your eye, and before you know it, your parents are getting older. And sometimes you come home
Mhm.
and you talk to your parents, and then your mother will say, "Oh yeah, well I was having some chest pain." And I had to go to the doctor, and you're like, okay, why
Right.
didn't you tell me?
Right.
Why didn't you call? Oh, well, we didn't want to bother you. And so that was the way my parents would handle it. And so it's been kind of over time a balance of accepting the fact that they're getting older, trying to be there as the best you can. And we'll talk about this. We have some time tonight, but I think the main challenge for me, and it may be for some of the people who are watching, is knowing what you can control
Yes.
and knowing what you can't. And the one thing that I've learned with my parents getting older, dealing with health issues, wanting to still be parents, because no matter how old they get,
Right.
they're still going to be your parents, is letting go and being able to say, okay, I can help with a certain amount of things. And there are other things that I can't. So, like,
Yes.
they may not call me, and to not take it personally,
Right.
or not feel like you're personally responsible if something happens while you weren't there, because even when you're there something could have happened. So for me, the hardest thing has been to when they don't want to tell me stuff
Mm-hmm.
and they just kind of handle it on their own, I had to realize and say, okay, how can I help? And then say, we're fine. Then I had to say, okay, well, you'll call me when
Right.
you need help. And that's really hard to do, especially, and for me, like my parents, I owe them everything. Like
Mm.
everything that I am, everything that I do, every success I've had in my life is because of all the work they put in
Mm-hmm.
and how they raised me and their dedication to just being good parents.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain amount that you feel, if I can help, I want to be able to help. And so when you can't help,
Mm-hmm.
I imagine it is kind of, because it is when you get older, the roles are reversed.
Absolutely.
And you get to a point where it's like, well, you become the parent and you want to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the parents are still getting older and say, like, your parents are probably like, well, Johnny, we want to take care of you. We're checking in to make sure you're
right.
all right. That's our role.
Yes.
And so they don't want you to kind of flex on that.
Nope.
So,
nope. And that has been an interesting, well, let me take a step back. So the same as you, my parents are just my world. Like they are my two favorite people on earth.
right.
Their strength and their all the things that I am, the person you're watching on camera is because of Brenda and Johnny,
Right.
for real. You're watching a compiled version of them, right? And so when I remember when I reflect on being present, right? And you're around more, I took for granted that they were aging even when I was in their presence, right? Because you're kind of experiencing it along with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm growing too, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
aging. So it's just happening.
Right.
And I definitely remember there was a moment for me when I had, so like I said, 15 years I left. There was a moment when I visited home and my mother had gray hair in a place that she didn't have gray before.
Right.
And that threw me so far off because I felt guilty.
Absolutely.
I felt guilty that I was missing. I felt like I was now missing her life.
Right.
And then I had to figure out how to cope with that. Now I never said this to them, so if they ever watch this video, now she knows.
Now she knows, right?
But I remember going in. I think I mentioned it to my brother. Fortunately, and shout out to my brother, he lives nearby. Mm-hmm. So if I ever need to check up on my parents
mm-hmm.
and or ask questions or get the real deal on stuff, I have him to be able to do that. But that guilt came from, I think part of it comes from this idea that media has shown us this, and over the years we've been taught that you're supposed, like, the roles change and that I'm supposed to be there to take care of them. Right. I'm supposed to be there. And so I immediately felt guilty, like, you're just like screwing up. This is your one job.
Right.
Child.
And I think that's like a huge part of it too. I think the guilt is one thing if you can't be there and if you can't help. The other thing is that, sometimes is the gay child in the family. We are always the one that people assume we don't have shit going on at home. A lot of us aren't married. Most of us probably don't have kids. Mm-hmm. We're just working. So family members will look at us and be like, you ain't got shit to do. So you're supposed to be the one to step up. And I can't tell you the number of stories that I've heard from friends and other people where it's always the gay son or the gay daughter that ends up stepping up and taking care of parents. And to your point about guilt, I think a lot of us go through something where parents guilt themselves when they find out their kids are same gender loving, or their kids are queer or gender nonconforming or transgender. And they think, what did I do wrong? Mm-hmm. And parents like internalize that a lot. And I think sometimes kind of going along the same line of when, we as the same gender loving offspring, we always feel like because of the way some of our families react that we've disappointed them. So what we end up doing is trying to overcompensate. And so, like, we're strivers. We talk about that a lot with like Black gay men. Like, we're striving to overachieve. We have to work twice as hard to get half as far. We want to make sure we overcompensate when, our families are disappointed that we're same gender loving. So we want to make sure we prove to them
Yes.
that we're worthy children, that we've made it, that we've done all this. And I think part of that continuum is like, we end up saying, okay, well, we'll take care of everything.
Yes.
And so, okay, what do you guys need? What do you guys need? And I found myself doing that with my parents. My sister lives out in California. She's got 2 kids, so she's busy. She's created her whole life. I'm in Atlanta, was in Philly, was in New York. So immediately when it goes down, something goes down, I'm the one that can move quickly with stuff. But the fact of the matter is that I know, like, depending on how families interact, I know siblings who have kids, whether they're gay or straight, and have families who will drop everything they're doing and go take care of their parents.
Absolutely.
So to me, it's never an excuse. It's one of those things where, like, if I was in California or in Vancouver and my parents called me and said, something's wrong, we need you to come here, I would tow my kids right with me.
Absolutely.
And my spouse, he would be right there with me, and we'd figure out what we needed to do. And so, but I think we feel a need to kind of overcompensate because our parents may have been disappointed in us, or our parents may be upset that we didn't give them kids, or for, the extreme, parents kicked them out of the house. And so you feel this guilt later on, like, but then you're torn. Okay, so, they really didn't support me when I was, dealing with my sexual orientation and coming out about that. And now I need to help them at this point. They need me now. Like, what am I going to do? And so I think a lot of us go through these kind of conflicting stories, either that story or it's the guilt because they've done so much for us, like with your parents and my parents, that we feel like, oh my God, if I'm not there every day, taking them to the doctor's appointments, helping them with groceries, helping them financially, we're not doing our responsibilities as their children.
And going right there, like, first of all, I want to say, hey, thank you to Tanisha and Warren for joining. Thank you so much.
Hey, y'all.
For me, it was perceived, right? So this guilt I was feeling was nothing. I remember having a conversation with my father. So going back to the fact, so I came out, oh my goodness, I've been out of the closet now for many years at this point. And I was always very clear that I didn't want to disappoint my parents, right? I didn't want to disappoint them. And I remember having this conversation with my father about 4 years ago. He was here in Atlanta. And I said, well, I always wanted to make sure I was, doing the right thing. And I didn't want to disappoint you. And my dad looked at me and he was like, you don't want to disappoint yourself, son. Like, it has nothing to do with us. And so this stuff I was feeling was perception. Like, it was what I was feeling. It was, and I know other folks that have experienced that as well. We put this pressure on ourselves. And I get where it comes from.
Absolutely.
And I think part of this conversation, hey there, Warren. Part of this conversation is really being able to talk about that. And I'm curious to hear from folks that are watching as well, like your experience with aging parents and some of the things that you've had to work through, because one of the other things, of course, that we experience with aging parents is health challenges.
Right. Yeah, and I think if you guys watching have some stories about your parents and kind of how you dealt with them aging, either whether some internalized stuff you've been dealing with, or how you dealt with some of the health challenges or some of the communication issues. I've seen, like, just with me and my parents, like, we've had to change our roles and how we communicate, what we communicate. My father is a very proud man, and when there were things that he couldn't do that he was used to doing physically, he would get upset about that. And sometimes, as a son, you're kind of sitting there, and the knee jerk is to just be like, when your father or your elder barks at you, you're gonna bark right back. Like, okay, I'm grown now. I'm not a kid anymore, so you're not gonna talk to me like that. And so, sometimes when that would happen, you have to step out of yourself and say, oh my God, what is he going through? And thinking about my dad, thinking about my mom, when they get frustrated with things and how it manifests, and they don't mean to take it out on me, but if I come there, it may come out, or they may feel offended about this, that, or the other. I have to realize that it's not about me, not personalize it, not make it, kind of my own shit that I'm perceiving or whatever, and just kind of say, well, okay, how can I help them, or what are they going through? And then just ask questions. I think, to me, that's the best way I can do it. And I think less is more. What I've learned is that less is more, and you try to do what you can. Like, when I go home to see my parents, I'm always offering money. I'm always trying to, can I help with this? Can I help with that? but my parents have gotten into this rhythm now where when I come home, my mother will have a little list. Okay, we want you to do this. So this broke, and we need you to fix
Yes.
this. This light needs fixing here. Can you take this down and do this? And we need you to move this furniture over here. And so those kind of things I enjoy doing.
Yes.
And they're also very clear. My parents are very considerate. So they'll say, you know, we know you work hard, and we want you to rest when you're here. So we don't want to put you to work as soon as you go home. Do your parents do the same thing?
Oh my gosh.
And so you just have to kind of go with it and just help when you can. And I think, you know, we talk about our biological parents, but, you know, obviously if you don't have your biological parents with you, but you have mentors or elders or aunts and uncles, you're feeling the same thing. So this doesn't just apply if it's your biological parents. So if you have other people in your life that are elders that you're watching as they get older and kind of how that's impacting you, let us know what you do. Send us a shout and let us know, you know, how you handle those kind of things.
Absolutely. So I looked down and I noticed that my dad is now watching.
Okay, good.
So
Hey, Dad.
Mr.
Kornegay.
He is watching. So you brought up a really good point.
Right.
This is interesting because I never would have perceived that my going home experience would be this.
Right.
My parents' home is sanctuary when I go home, and they do a really good job of protect. Like there's a place where I can go and I can feel like I can be quiet and be protected, and there's not an expectation. Like there's always stuff for me to do. There's always a thing for me to do, but there's also not an expectation that I have to do all the extra stuff. They just want me to be there, and that in itself is interesting because I wouldn't have, when I was younger and kind of growing up in the house, I wouldn't have perceived that would be life like for me now. But when I go home, it's like sanctuary for me. I like being in there. I like hanging out with them.
And that's intentional. Like they create it like that because they don't want to cause you stress, and they just like you being home. And so I think a lot of times for parents, and I'm just speaking from my own case, but maybe this will resonate with some people. Like for my dad, my mom was always home. She was home for most of the time. She went to baseball games, basketball games, football games. She did all that. My dad was working so hard when I was younger. So he was always kind of on call in the hospital, not at the house, didn't go to any of the sports events. And when I was a teenager, I used to resent him. So I used to be pissed. I was like, why are you not showing up? Why are you not present? And you don't have the brain the intellect to say, okay, he's working so hard to make sure we have a roof overhead, to make sure I can participate in these activities, to make sure I can go to school. And so what happens is that when you get older, like, and I know from my dad, once he retired, and he had to force retire because he had a health issue, he wanted to see me more. And so when you get older, and like I remember vividly when I got ready to leave the house for college, my father was a wreck. And he was a wreck because he realized that he had missed all those years because he was working so hard, because that was his priority, to be a provider. And I think for a lot of Black men, especially Caribbean Black men just in general in the United States, like the goal is to be a provider. Like that's a part of masculinity. Like if you have a family, you provide for them. That makes you a man. And so he did that to the nth degree. But when he saw me getting ready to leave, he was thinking to himself, oh my God, like I missed all this time. Like I don't want him to go because I want him to still be here so I can have more time. So I think when he got older, he started to cherish more of the times when I did come home. And so it wasn't that I had to bring anything like money or any gifts or had to do any work while I was there, but it was just my presence of being there, because I think he had missed sometimes early, and he regretted that to a certain extent, but I don't think he would do it differently because he raised us well, and you know, he was a good father, excellent father, but I think there's some regret, like, oh, I would have probably spent a little more time with them back then, because I didn't realize how fast they were going to grow up and then want to leave the house. So,
one of the things, so we kind of touched on this earlier. I remember, so as parents age, sometimes health issues arise, and there were a couple of scary. My dad has scared us a couple of different times. I know he's watching, like with health scares, right? And so the last time I was home for this was last year, and I'm so grateful that he found his own path to what makes him feel better, using kind of a mixture of what the doctor talked about and now. But here's what was interesting. So hear about this, I go home and I'm on a tear. So I immediately go into, okay, here are the rules, like here's what we have to do, here's all the things, right? Because I'm all in my feelings, right? Because I'm like, you have to do all of these things, like A, B, C, D, and E. Here's the entire bag of medications that you must take, and all of this, and here's the foods. Baby, I started to cook them foods that he'd never eaten before. And meanwhile, I'm going to leave. Right? So my brother was very clear, like, okay, you're doing like all this cooking and all of this stuff.
You're doing way too much.
And you do realize that once you're gone, that part of that will maintain, but part of it will not. And I really had to sit back and sit with that. And I remembered when I went home following that, not being as worried about, okay, are you following the routine, but are you feeling better?
Yeah. And that's all it comes down to.
And that's all it comes down to. But I do vividly remember that, of being able to want to kind of go in and do it all. But we can't. Especially if we are not, if we don't live in the same area, if it's something, if we don't see them as often.
Yeah, unless you're prepared to kind of move back.
Yes.
And do everything and live in the same house. Like all that stuff that you're doing is great for like the few days or a week that you're home. And then when you leave, it's going to go back to what it was before. Yeah. And so you fool yourself into thinking that you're going to institute some kind of change. And I think sometimes it's what it is. And then also realizing, like, as you go home and you see your parents are very fallible. And your parents may not always make the right decisions. And the memory may not be as good as it used to be. Or you see people taking advantage of elders all the time now, like the scams on the phones, the way you see them being treated at offices or at the grocery store or something. I've noticed I've become very sensitive and protective of both my mother and my father when I'm someplace. If I see somebody like doing something or saying something or giving an attitude, I'm kind of like, I'm ready to jump on them because I've become very protective of them because I don't want anyone taking advantage of them. Like my parents, finding real estate agents considering selling their house. Like I was just always looking at side eye with people because I was like, what are they doing? Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? And they were like, okay, well, just trust. Yeah. And I'm coming in all turned up. And I had to learn to stop, let go, and just let it happen. And just trust that if they need you, they'll let you know. And that's my parents. And that may not be everyone's parents. That may not be how everyone's relationship flows. But for me, what worked for me was that if I stopped trying to do too much and just let it to them and say, hey, if y'all need anything, please let me know. And just if I can help in any way, whether it be so my parents will call me every once in a while. I'm a physician. So they'll call and they'll say, you remember when you prescribed us this, that, and the other? And I don't always like prescribing when it's not a patient or for family members or for friends. But for my parents, oh, absolutely, I will. And then when my dad will tell me something like, I went to the doctor and the doctor said, I have these symptoms and the doctor said X, Y, and Z. And I was like, that's wrong. Like they're not doing that right. And then I have to kind of take charge. Yes. And it's a hard balance to find. I remember even when my dad had a stroke and was in the hospital, I was a resident, so I was still in training, but people were like doing what I construed as the wrong thing. And they weren't treating him as aggressively as I thought they were. But I was conflicted because I was like, I don't want to be that annoying family member and think that I'm the know-it-all and push. But I will tell people unequivocally right now, if you have a family member or an elder that's in the hospital, do not ever worry about pissing off the medical staff or being annoying. Your primary goal is to make sure your loved one leaves that hospital alive. And so bark at them, scream at them, do the research, go back and find out again, because I second guessed myself and I regretted it later because my dad didn't have a great outcome with it. And he struggled for a number of months to a year after his stroke. And so I remember thinking to myself, God, I should have pushed them a little bit more, but I let them kind of talk me down about stuff instead of just being an asshole and saying like, this is my dad. Are y'all doing the right thing? And, seeing it. But I think we struggle with that sometimes because how much is too much? Your parents don't want you to make a big deal. Some of our parents will be like, well, the doctor knows what's best. So Johnny, just be quiet.
Yes. And you know what? It's so funny that you say that. I'm like super grateful that my parents do trust me a lot. So they'd be like, hold on, let me let my son hear this, call him. Absolutely. So if I was outside the room, my dad would be like, hey, let me call my son really quick so he can hear what you're about to say. Absolutely. And I'm grateful for that. And we did have a question. Oh, and Jarrell said hello.
Hey, Jarrell. What up, Neff?
And we have a question from Alvin. How do you
What's
start?
up?
How do you start the conversation when you realize your parents can no longer live on their
Oh, wow.
own? Wow.
That's a tough one.
Now, so in my case, mm, I haven't had to have that conversation with them yet. However, my brother and I have loosely we well, this is several years ago, but we did at least broach the subject amongst him and I
Right, right,
about what that might look like.
right.
I will be honest though and say that is probably that's one of the scariest
I think
things.
that's one of the scariest conversations. My answer to that would be handle it delicately.
Yeah.
But I think instead of like, I think some of us, and I include myself in this, there have been times where I've tried to prove my point to my parents, and it's almost like an ego thing, like
Mm.
child trying to prove that, I'm just as smart or I know just as
Mm.
much as you do. And like making a case, like point by point. So you fell the other day, you forgot this, you
Mhm.
did this, you did this. That's not the way to
Mm.
handle it. I think always the approach has to be coming from a feeling standpoint, not to sound like overly social work or psychologist,
Mhm.
but come with the feeling like I'm worried.
Yes.
I'm concerned about your health. I'm concerned. I came back and I noticed some things were going on, and I'm concerned that you guys are struggling a little bit taking care. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help? And then, because I think for most parents, I imagine they're probably scared of somebody saying like, we're going to bring you to a nursing home and we want to just kind of like
Mhm.
pawn you off to assisted living or nursing home. And I think that's a lot of parents like legitimate fears. Like,
Yeah.
we don't want to live in this community or in this place where we're going to be treated like shit when we have family members, offspring that could probably take care of us.
Yeah.
So I think the earlier you have that conversation, handling it delicately and staying within your feelings and making sure they know it's because you care. It's not because you want to pawn them off, but like have something
Right.
where you want to be a part of this.
Yes.
And how you can help. I think asking the question and going from there is a reasonable approach.
Absolutely. And and if you my dad is very good at this as well, but if you are able to have that conversation with them ahead of time, like
Right.
knowing, I mean, because your our parents also recognize that they're getting older,
Right,
and they
right.
also recognize what that can mean.
Right.
So I have had experiences where my dad has said, okay, here's stuff I need you to know, and we've sort of kind of had the conversation of what he would want if it came to a point where he couldn't live alone. So I have, so I know where he comes from.
Yeah, and to that point, I would say have the conversation before some shit goes wrong,
Oof.
health wise, because like for us, with our with my dad, he had a stroke, and then we had to figure out all this stuff, and because he was on death's door, we weren't sure whether he was going to make it or not. And so, but that was like 20 years ago, so it's been like a blessing that
Yeah.
he's been around for so long since then. But if you can have the conversation when it's not under duress, when it's
Mhm.
not under crisis, so you can have like just a conversation instead of having to make decisions
Yeah.
right at that moment, it's better. So make sure they have a durable power of attorney, make sure they have a will, make sure if who they want to represent them in case they can't speak for themselves.
Mm.
Like, have that conversation, find out where all their paperwork is. I remember
Yes.
one time my mom brought me to a room with
Exactly.
a drawer, and she said, hey, if anything happens to us, here's the drawer. All the papers are in here. Call so and so. This is for the funeral director. These are the paperwork for that. And she kind of laid it all
Yep.
out. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I know where that drawer is. So if anything happens, I'll know what to do. But I think if they have a backup plan like that and they know they can trust you with that, but like having those conversations, and they're really tough to have because
Yes.
it's acknowledging
It
your parents'
acknowledges.
mortality, and that's a hard thing to deal with.
Yep. Last time I was home, the reason why I thought of that, because it was interesting when we first got into this. I was like, well, I really hadn't had to do it. My dad sat down and did. I was just sitting at the dining room table, and of course, I'm working and I'm being quiet. And he comes down with this envelope of things and he begins to go through. And I'm like, oh, this is
Is this
ready.
that conversation?
This is
right?
that conversation.
right.
And so we do have several comments. This is Bernard. I'm the fifth of six sons. One brother passed, but the closest geographically to my 92-year-old mother
Oh, wow.
in upstate New York, actually. I get the to-do list when I go home, but I'm glad to do them. There are things she can do and things she can no longer do. My brothers get the same treatment when they visit. Our roles have reversed, and we do what we can to help her. Mom is still very independent,
Right.
computer savvy. Come on, mom.
Right.
Computer savvy. She grocery shops online.
Online, good for
I
her.
don't even do that.
Right.
And her mind is still sharp, but physically she slowed down, and I am happy to help where I can.
Yeah, and I think
Thanks,
that's
Bernard.
thanks Bernard for that comment. Yeah, I think that's the best approach to it. Is like let her kind of dictate a little bit,
Yeah.
and then she'll be able to realize. Your parents can realize when they can't drive anymore. Because
Yep.
there's a point where you may not be able to drive, you may not be able to move around, so
Yes.
you may need a walker or a cane or something like that because of a fall risk.
Mhm.
So I think they know what's going on, but they don't need it thrown in their face.
Absolutely.
To really remind them because they understand what changes are going on. So I think, like Bernard said, is just to kind of be there and just go with the flow and be flexible because I'm ready at the drop of a hat. Like
Right.
if something happens, if I need to drop things and go up, I'm already thinking about how I can do family and medical leave at work
Mhm.
and do these kind of options to help out in the short term. But I think being prepared for that,
Yes.
you may not have to be there. And if you can't be there every day because of job or geography, just being able to know that you can be there when they need you is
Yes.
a huge relief to them.
We have another comment, and then I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is from Marvin. Retired early from a job that kept me out of the country. Wow. My dad was really receptive to my presence, got his finances in order, took care of his will and other life issues. Although I enjoyed my profession, those 10 years I spent with him were probably the best 10 years of my life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It puts it all in perspective.
It does. I know for me, being in Philly, when I came home, when my dad had a stroke, I was home for like 2 months. I took time off when my pops had a heart attack. I took like 2 months off to spend time with my family.
Mhm.
And like those moments you don't really get back.
Right.
And so it always feels good to be there. And then it just puts it in larger perspective. Like he said, like the job will always be there, work will always be there, other shit will always be there when you get back. But your elders, your parents, the people that raised you, that, brought you into this earth or helped you get to where you are today, they will not always be there. It's not always a given. So spend the time and take the time with them when you can. That's a good message.
One of the things that I've learned to let myself off the hook when I can't do all the things. So background, I chose to live an unconventional life at an older age, right? So I lived a very conventional kind of, I checked all the boxes. I was black and gay, and I had a career, and I was upwardly mobile. I was striving, doing all the things. Now, the cool part is I still do all of those things, right? So I'm still striving. I'm still doing way too much.
Right.
However, I have decided to live the life of an entrepreneur and an artist. And I felt guilt. I have felt guilt in that too, like of being, not being able to kind of do all the things,
Right.
or feel like I should need to do more. And so the question I have for folks out there is, what has been your experience of living your life fully and present in your own life, and also making sure doing what you can for your aging elders? Because for me,
it's a balance.
It's a balance.
Right.
Like, and what I've had to find for me is it's truly a balance.
Right.
Right.
It depends on your siblings, how many siblings
Absolutely.
you have. How there are, I know families where the siblings kind of share responsibility. If there's an aging parent or an aging elder, they take shifts in spending time, and they'll take time off from work, or they'll do whatever, they'll finagle whatever they need to do. And so it really depends. I think it's toughest when you're an only child, or when you're the only child that's geographically close. But again, it's going to depend on what your parents' needs are, what they want, how much they'll allow you to help them. All those kind of things come into play too. So
are there, in terms of when I think medically, David, are there things that we should be asking our parents as they age about health or with their doctors?
Yeah. I think that's a good question. I wasn't even thinking about that, because I was thinking about more like the emotional, and kind of what we go through. But I think, vaccinations are always important when they get over 65, Pneumovax. When they get over 50, there's a newer vaccination that prevents shingles.
Okay.
So when their immune system gets a little bit weak, I think just paying attention to some of the smaller things. We talked about memory a little bit. If they start to forget some stuff, leave the stove on, put something in the freezer that isn't supposed to be there, forget like small lists, just seem like they're not themselves sometimes. And also kind of smaller things. One of the things, being an internal medicine doctor and dealing with patients who sometimes are older, and older, I usually mean around 65, 70 and above, your immune system gets weaker when you get older. And so when you get like a pneumonia when you're younger, or when you get sick, some kind of infection, your body mounts a fever. It shows certain things. So for sometimes we'll see, if you work in a hospital, you'll have a little old lady come in, she's 85, and she's just confused. She doesn't know where she is. If you notice that something is going on with your elders, that their behavior is a little bit off, they're forgetful, or they seem confused and out of it, don't jump right to dementia, which is kind of long-term brain slowing, and your cognitive function isn't as good. There's a different term called delirium, which means acute confusion. And that can be caused by low blood sugar. It can be caused by a fever, low blood pressure. It can be caused by electrolyte problems like potassium, calcium, magnesium, all those things being out of whack, sodium being out of whack. Elders get dehydrated quickly. Elder women get urinary tract infections. Elder men with big prostates can get urinary tract infections. And when those urinary tract infections don't get treated, the bacteria can get into the bloodstream, and it can cause a condition called sepsis, where you get confused. You could get a fever, your heart rate starts to go up. But again, when you're older, you may not show all those signs and symptoms. So sometimes it's the subtle things. Don't just laugh it off and be like, oh, that's just so-and-so grandpa being this, or that's just daddy doing da-da-da-da-da. Like, think if something seems a little bit off, get it checked out. All it would take is a routine urine test and maybe some blood work to make sure that everything is fine. But we really have to be careful with that. And that's one of the things you have to like stay on top of, because it can be the real subtle things with elders that they won't present like a typical person would. But you have to consider that when deciding how aggressive you're going to be in getting medical care.
Wow, that's really good information.
It's a lot, right? Yeah, it's a lot.
And it's a lot too. And it also puts in perspective why we should ask these important medical questions. And if there's an opportunity, I don't get to do this as often when I'm home. I try and make myself available, for doctor's appointments. And
one more thing I forgot to mention, because I went right to like the medical stuff, and this has to do with the medical stuff, but not exactly the conditions. But as we get older, we pile on more medical conditions. And as we pile on more medical conditions, what do we take? We take more medications.
Yes.
When you get older, if your kidney function isn't good, your liver function isn't as good, you can't clear those medications as efficiently, and they start to combine and interact with each other. And so like your blood pressure medication can bottom, and you can get confused or feel lethargic. And sometimes you can get confused or dizzy or not sleep as well. And so it's always a good idea, if you've ruled out a lot of medical stuff, go over your parents or your elders' list of medications. You can look up quickly on the internet. There are tons of websites where you could look up one drug interacting with another. What can it cause? What's contraindicated? Sometimes the pharmacies don't pick it up. Sometimes the doctors don't pick it up, but you may be able to pick it up as a child or as one of your offspring of your elders, because if you pick up on some of those things, don't just think it's always something medical, but it could be a medication. It's called polypharmacy. Just a lot of medications on board can really tip elders over, make them confused, mess with their blood pressure, mess with their functioning, all kinds of things.
Wow.
So
and I would imagine diet plays an important role too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But I mean, anything can, you do the same diet stuff, but I think as they get older and older, like my father's funny. After he had a heart attack and he had bypass surgery, when he got transferred from the ICU to the general ward, all he wanted one morning, his taste buds had been messed up because of the bypass. And he said, you know what? I want pizza and a beer. And like, this man had just had a heart attack.
And you're like,
so check this out. So this is what we did. My dad, he was like 83 years old, I think, when this happened, 82 years old. So he was in the ward, and we went and got a pizza. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning, and I had a Corona, and I'd put it in ice, and me and my mom drove over to see him. And we just put it down on the little desk you give in the hospitals when you're by your bed. And my dad sat there, and he saw the piece of pizza, and he took one bite, and he took one swig of the Corona, and he just laid back, and he was like,
life is good.
And he just like sighed. It was just like, it was the most peaceful thing you could have done for him. And so a lot of people wouldn't do that. And so, like, again, and you know, I'm a physician, so I'm not going to advise people to always do this, but there's a part of it that's humanity versus the medical stuff. So if someone has lung cancer and you see them smoking, everyone will make a joke like, oh, how you going to be smoking? Because that's how you got lung cancer to begin with. But if someone has already had, like, if it's spread all over, they're just getting chemotherapy or the prognosis isn't good, what is the harm of letting that person go out and get a quit smoke? Like, I looked at, my dad had just had a bypass operation, 4-vessel bypass. He wants a beer and pizza, none of which are good for his heart, but it is going to be good for his spirit.
It's going to be good for his spirit.
And it was good for his spirit. And he recovered well, and he's been doing fine ever since. So yeah, it's just one of those things.
Wow. Well, wow. This has been a rich conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us online. As we mentioned earlier, you can find us here. This is our new night, so we'll be here on Wednesday
night. Hey, Charles Stevens.
Hey, Charles Stevens.
We know you in DC doing the work. Love you.
Absolutely. So, Charles, we'll be back here on Wednesday evenings, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once again, you can follow the Counter Narrative Project here on Facebook. You can follow us at Building Desire on Twitter, and you can follow us at the Counter Narrative on Instagram, and you can find Revolutionary Health videos on YouTube. So like our YouTube channel, you could stay up to speed because we have these videos and many, many others there. So thank you all for joining us. David, thank you for having me with you.
Johnny was a great host tonight. No, Charles.
And my dad came on and watched too.
Bye, Mr. Kornegay.
That's like crazy. That just like made my heart go crazy. So thank you all so much. Have a great evening. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.